You are really welcome to a very exciting seminar, a reporting seminar where we have looked at how to produce sustainable aviation fuels in Sweden, in Småland. My name is Jakob Lagerkrans. I'm the CEO of the 2030 Secretariat, committed at looking at the decarbonization of the transport sector in Sweden, including aviation. We will have a seminar for about an hour and a half, where we will have a keynote very soon by Barbara von Koppen from KLM. We will have 3 panels looking at what does the market say, first on the project, and then what does the market say, and then what do we need to really get these investments going. And by the end of the day, maybe we will get a response from the people in charge. Are they ready to get going on this? But now I would like to welcome Barbara von Koppen. You are member of the KLM ExCom, and you will be soon with me here on the screen. KLM is one of the pioneers when it comes to flying on sustainable aviation fuels. You started with your first commercial flight in 2011, and I think nobody has flown more flights on sustainable aviation fuel than KLM. And Barbara, I hope you're online. I can now see you on the screen. The floor is yours.
Hello.
Please proceed. I give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. It's my honor and actually pleasure to attend this digital seminar, at least from a distance, on Swedish sustainable aviation fuel, with the title Flying on Forest Residues in Småland. Yes, we can. A very encouraging and challenging title. It's been almost a year that I was in Stockholm in person, at that time to celebrate KLM's 100th anniversary. And what a different world we live in today. I can't be present at your premises. I'm here in Amstelveen. And the COVID crisis keeps us all awake at night. Many industries and many individuals are very hard hit by this deep crisis. Aviation certainly is not an exception, and we are facing this unprecedented crisis with still limited visibility on timing and pace of recovery, which is why so many airlines around the globe had to call upon their governments for financial support, and KLM and Air France are no exception to that rule. We feel privileged to have received such support despite the challenges that come with the fulfillment of the conditions attached. And we are actually in the midst of difficult union negotiations to meet tomorrow's October deadline, which is why I also have to leave your seminar shortly after my keynote. But the good news is that despite these challenging times, our overarching ambition has not changed. We aim to lead in customer centricity, efficiency, and sustainability. And as regards sustainability, COVID-19 has not stopped our efforts. Even more, we believe it's a catalyst to accelerate our efforts and ambitions. Not only because we see increasing attention and pressure of national governments or the European Commission, I just referred to the Green Deal that has been announced by them, we also feel truly engaged to emerge from this crisis stronger. And that means with a true focus on the long term, a focus on our role in society, and a focus on sustainability. We owe that to you, to our customers, our people, society at large, and our planet. In that, we will not lose our pioneering spirit, which was already referred to in the introduction. It has been a key differentiator in our rich history and will continue to be so. And evidence for that is that over a decade, we have been a leader in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Our Fly Responsibly initiative launched last year in June underpins that we take responsibility for our carbon footprint. And for that, we have set ourselves challenging ambitions. In 2030, we aimed for a reduction of 15% of our total CO2 footprint compared to 2005. And that's a 50% reduction per passenger kilometer. And to realize those ambitions, we have embraced a 3-step approach: reduce, replace, and compensate. Despite the crisis, we will continue our fleet renewal plans to reduce our carbon footprint. Slightly adapted though, but also with some good momentum attached to that. Our old Boeing 747 fleet has for the larger part left our fleet, and the remainder will soon leave our fleet. We will continue to introduce the much more CO2 friendly Boeing 787 aircraft. We continue to implement fuel efficiencies, weight reductions on board, optimal flight procedures, and optimal maintenance as well. And reducing emissions and moving away from fossil fuels, they go hand in hand, which I will explain in a second. Over the next 10 years, for instance, European airlines will invest a staggering amount of 169 billion in greener aircraft technologies, which are on average 25% cleaner and less noisy than their predecessors. Where we cannot reduce, we will replace. Our main focus in that respect is the scale-up of sustainable aviation fuels, which is today's seminar's topic. We have committed ourselves to procure 75,000 tons of SAF that will be produced by the first European SAF factory in Delfzijl. That we do together with our valued partner SkyNRG, also attending this afternoon's seminar. And we continue to explore other options like the one we're discussing today. And I think that the Växjö project, I know I'm not pronouncing Växjö in the right Swedish way, apologies for that, but it's a continued evidence of our efforts in this area. Where reduction and replacement do not provide sufficient reductions, we will continue through offering sustainable offsetting products. We already have 2 programs in place and are looking in the development of others, extended programs, and there we have our CO2 zero offsetting program for our passengers and our corporate biofuel program for large companies. So reduce, replace, and compensate remain key levers of our carbon reduction strategy. And that brings me to the purpose of today. Today it's all about SAF and the opportunities here in Sweden. At KLM, we're true believers that in the short to medium term, SAFs offer the best possible option for more sustainable aviation. As an early adapter, and it was already referred to, we were the first airline to fly on sustainable aviation fuel. And it has ever since been at the corner and it has ever actually been one of the cornerstones of our carbon footprint strategy. Sweden's roadmap towards sustainable aviation is a clear path and an excellent timing to projects like the one that's on today's agenda. The introduction of the reduction levels starting from next year with an average of 0.8%, if I have understood correctly, of greenhouse gas reduction ambitions is a clear signal towards the agenda and towards the need for the production of more sustainable aviation fuels. The study that is on the table today shows there is potential in Sweden for such production. And not only from a sustainability perspective, but certainly also from an economic perspective. It also matches very well KLM's own operations. We have been flying for 100 years already to Sweden, and with the introduction of our route to Växjö, we actually have further emphasized our commitment to green development of our industry. It's with great regret, though, that due to today's circumstances, we're not operating to Växjö at the moment. But let's hope that the tide will change and we will soon be able to reopen the destination. At KLM, we are proud that together with the partners in this project, that we have contributed or maybe can contribute to the transformation of the aviation industry and to promote the production of renewable and sustainable fuels. As will today's seminar prove, technology diversification is very important in that respect. We need to diversify when it comes to technology for the production of SAF. And next to that, a right policy framework should help focusing on maturing the different pathways that we see lying ahead. It will only be possible to really enable commercial SAF production from local feedstocks, for instance, in the Småland region. I realize we have a long way to go, and this way is not being made much easier given the current circumstances. But at the same time, I'm truly convinced we're moving in the right direction. I therefore, as concluding my short introduction, I applaud the work that has been done in this project. It clearly demonstrates the potential of Sweden to take a next step in the production of SAFs using local feedstocks. It will be a tremendous effort and requires not only financing but also true collaboration by all stakeholders. Let me conclude by, for now, thanking all that have contributed to the project to date. I thank you very much, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you. And thank you for being part in an industry in a crisis, also an industry that needs to move on environmental issues. But you are so important because you are a customer, you've signed an offtake agreement with SkyNRG, and you're involved in a project like this. And that is tremendous boost for development. I just want to conclude now. I lived in Amsterdam for a year or two, so I say danke wel, Barbara van Koppen, and thank you for participating with us today.
Thank you. I wish you a very good and fruitful seminar, and I know that some of my colleagues are present as well, led by Gijs, our General Manager in Sweden, and I'm positive that he will debrief me afterwards on the outcomes of your seminar. I wish you all the best and hope to be back in Stockholm soon in person.
Thank you very much, Barbara.
Bye-bye.
And now, before we have the first panel, we will look at the short intermission, a short film from KLM on flying sustainably, where actually the alternative of train is being brought forward by an airline company. Interesting.
How are we reducing our carbon footprint? Considering the continued growth of the aviation industry and related carbon emissions, our sector needs to become more sustainable. But the thing is, aviation lays the world at our feet. We want to be able to do business in Beijing, to find ourselves in Bali, to start over in New York. So as KLM, we're taking responsibility for making our business more sustainable. How? By recycling our waste, flying on sustainable fuel, with more efficient routing, and with cleaner planes. We're also cutting weight wherever possible, from the materials our new planes are made with to the trays on which we serve your food. The factor that creates the biggest impact, but also the biggest challenge, is the replacement of fossil fuel with sustainable fuel. So we're fast-tracking the sustainable fuel industry with our investments in our corporate biofuel program, a partnership initiative that stimulates making sustainable fuel economically more competitive than kerosene. And with our CO2 Zero service, it takes just a small contribution to compensate for the CO2 emissions your personal journey leaves behind. Since 2009, we've invested this contribution in sustainably certified CO2 reduction projects. We are currently one of the leading airlines when it comes to sustainability, and we will continue to do everything in our power to maintain this status. It will take substantial efforts from us and many others. But our ambition is to cut down the CO2 emissions per passenger by 50% by 2030 compared to 2005. This is our journey to more sustainable aviation.
Welcome back to our studio, where we are going to introduce today the people behind the project. It's a project that for the past few years have worked on finding ways to produce sustainable aviation fuel in Sweden, in Småland. And I have three people with me on the stage here in the studio, and we have one person participating from Holland, Misha van Valk. You are there behind us on the screen. Fantastic. I will introduce you one by one and let you do your presentation so we build on a general understanding on what has happened in this project. We're going to talk about how the project was set up by the project manager, Johanna Mossberg. We're going to talk about the environmental issues, the sustainability of the project, and the technical details. And Misha, you will give us an international outlook. Johanna Mossberg from RISE, Research Institutes of Sweden. You've been the project manager of this project, and it's been a great project, hasn't it?
Yes, Jakob, it has been a great project. It has been a great project to manage. And if I click, I might get my slides. But otherwise, we can say it's been a great project. And the basis for this project, I can say as a project manager, it started before it even was a project. It started in 2018 when there was a handshake at Växjö Småland Airport with a letter of intent saying that we would like to do something in this region with the resources that we have, with the knowledge, competence, and the infrastructure that we have with the industries. How can we take this and make something relating to sustainable biojet fuels in this region of Småland? So that was the starting point. And then we can say that we at RISE were invited to participate, and together with Luleå University of Technology, we have supported this industrial consortia. And the highlight of this project, one can say, is that it has a very strong value chain with the participating partners from all over, from the feedstock to the airplane, and also supported by the airports and the regional municipality and other companies. So it's a very strong value chain, and to have this basis from the industrial drive is fairly special. And as you can see, the aim of the project is to do a business plan for a regional value chain for biojet production, and the ultimate goal for this project is to facilitate a further process where we get a commercial plant for biojet in Småland based on local sustainable forest residue feedstock. And Elisabeth, Erik, and Mischa will talk a little bit more on that. But if you just go into and see what have we actually done in this project. We have evaluated several technology options, and we have looked into both technology options a bit further away and those that are very near term. And we have selected a technology based on forest residues that is feasible to implement in a fairly near-term future, and also shows to be cost competitive compared to other technologies for forest residue feedstock. And the nice thing is also that we can see that it could be possible to upscale this by replication, not only in Sweden, but also in other municipalities. But I would say that the highlight and the main USP of this project is actually that we have this fairly strong value chain, and that we can benefit, we can show that there are clear benefits of integrating production with existing sites. So we really utilize this Småland context to get main benefits and get what you say, sustainable investment. It's never very profitable, but to get a reasonable case, we will learn more about that, to actually get this first type of a plant going.
Interesting, and USP is unique selling point. And as you said, you have the raw material supplier, the forest industry there. We have the plant, the energy combinate. We have SkyNRG, who has worked, and we'll hear more from them on this for many years. And we have somebody on the offtake side with us in a municipality that really put down their foot for environmental and climate goals already in 1996. So what has surprised you in the project? Because we have in the title, yes, we can. We can actually do this.
Yes, and I would say that the main surprise actually of the project, usually when you're at an institute or a university and you have a project, you start a project and you have great enthusiasm in the beginning, and then it kind of fades out. And we have been doing this for more than a year, so almost 2 years. And to see that actually the enthusiasm in the project is still high, and everyone has participated and contributed more than planned. And I would say that it's sad to say that that is a surprise, but that's not always the case. And as a project manager, you're really happy when the people are as engaged by the end of the project as they were in the start.
Great praise from the project manager. Elisabeth Wetterlund, you're associate professor at the Luleå University of Technology, and you're going to talk about maybe, in one way, the most important issue, the hottest issue here. Can this be done sustainably? Are we going to cut down all our forests in order to be able to fly on biofuels?
I will say no, we will not cut down all the forest. And as Johanna said, when we opted for the feedstocks and substrates here, we didn't go for what was like technically easiest to do. We're going for something where there is a good supply potential in the area of Småland in a sustainable way. So we are only working with byproducts. So that's byproducts from the forest industry and from forest operations. So these are byproducts that are created anyway. And the first one is harvesting residues in the form of branches and tops from final felling mainly. And the other one is, or it's called grot in Swedish, and that one is bark from sawmills. So these are things that appear. They don't appear, they're produced anyway. And we don't need to cut down the forest. These come from the normal operation of the forest industry and the forestry operations. So, but even with that, we still need to take a number of like sustainability considerations into account when we estimate the potential, the supply potential. Because it's still not just like we can't just take everything and say that it's so sustainable. For one thing, biomass from the forest will only count as renewable as per definition if it comes from sustainably managed forest with a maintained productivity. So that means that if we are taking from deforestation, it doesn't count as renewable. You're not allowed to count it like that.
So we've cut down more than grows back.
Exactly. Yeah. So it has to grow back at least as much, preferably more. And the second one is that also about the CO2 emissions, that we don't just say that, okay, all forest biomass is CO2 neutral. We have emissions from the supply chain, so transportation, for example, and we have emissions from changes in the forest carbon stock. And the first one from the supply chain, these are like, we use them in the calculations when we calculate the greenhouse gas performance. They are accounted for. And the second one is accounted for in national inventories as well. So we have those long-term kind of managed forests, and the forest owners, they want to maintain productivity for a long time, I mean hundreds of years, but that's not for the bioenergy purpose. This is to be able to produce buildings and furniture and pulp and paper for like years and years, as that's the time frame we are talking about here when it comes to forests. And then we have other aspects which come to the two main things that are very important to consider when it comes to forests are biodiversity and also nutrient balances. So there are a number of environmental quality objectives that I've listed here that are important to consider. And we have regulations in place in Sweden to make sure that all forestry operations take those aspects into account. For example, we can't extract all the branches and tops. There always need to be some left. There might be a need for ash recirculation and so on. So I suggest that the closer we come to actual implementation of a project like this, the more important it is to go into detail in monitoring those environmental quality objectives. And then when we come to the actual potentials, as Johanna has already touched upon, the Småland area is really good for forest biomass. And we can see here on the map on the left, we see that we have, it's a heat map showing where it's green, there's a lot of branches and tops from the forestry operation, and where it's red, it's not so much. And the same with the bark, where we have a lot of sawmills in Småland. So it's a kind of good supply area. Today, around half of those branches and tops are left lying in the forest. So it's a good potential. So even with the current use, which is mainly for like heat and power plants and pellets production, we still have a good kind of net potential, which is shown here on the map on the right, where the green is still like the net potential. So Småland is looking really good for these kind of feedstocks. So to summarize, we are 100% of the feedstock we are accounting for is byproducts that comes from the forestry operations that will take place anyway. And we're also looking at sustainably managed forests. Almost all of the forests in Sweden are managed. And so that's the kind of forest we're looking at, not natural forest, is managed forests. And then also a potential to increase those extraction of those in a sustainable way. But also that it's important to continue to monitor those environmental quality objectives when coming to implementation.
There is a heated debate in Europe, I think, maybe in countries that don't have that much forest, maybe, about it. We should not cut down any trees at all, but we have a net growth of forest in Sweden and have had for the past 20 years.
Yeah, and that is also taken into account in these kind of scenarios that we have here, that we are it's this net growth. And I think also a common misconception in other countries that don't have managed forests is that all the forests are like natural environments, and they are not, because it's the largest part of the forest here is managed. So it's managed anyway, and those environmental issues that are listed here, or sustainability issues, they are related to all forest management. So it's not just for the bioenergy projects. So it's like all of forest. So it's a much larger debate than just about the bioenergy.
Yeah. But it's something that we will keep track on in this project and in the future, because it needs to be developed the whole time, because we have learned a lot over the past 40 years and we need to learn some more about sustainability in forestry.
Definitely. I would like to say also that I think that, the regulations are in place in Sweden, but there might be a need to these must always be maybe updated and checked, the more of these kind of projects that we see actually implemented. So that's in
Very good. Thank you very much. You're
Thank
going to
you.
do a very complex
do a
change.
complex
Fantastic. I think you did that really well. It's very special being in a studio where you actually have to adapt to a new way of doing seminars. I think you were perfect. Erik Furesjö, you are a senior researcher at RISE. You've been involved in, I'm not allowed to say all, but many of the biofuel research projects in Sweden for many different uses. So you know a lot, and you've looked at the technical feasibility of this project.
Yes, exactly. I've been responsible for doing the screening of various technologies and for evaluating the performance of the technology that we have selected in the project. That's correct, absolutely. When it comes to production of biojet fuels, you have a lot less degrees of freedom compared to other types of fuels because there is a certification process for jet fuels in general, because of safety reasons. And that means that if you're looking at something in a relatively short time perspective, which we are here, we want to make a difference, not in a really long time, but in a time frame that's maybe 5 to 10 years, then you have to look at the kinds of production processes that are already certified. Otherwise, it will take too long time. So that limits your production. Also, Elisabeth talked about feedstocks and the regional context. So we have also decided that we would like to look on technologies that can use this type of forest-based feedstocks and residue feedstocks. And so based on those criteria and a number of other criteria listed on the slide here, we have screened the available technologies first. And it's important to say that it's not a generic technology screening. There are lots of those published before for biojet fuel technologies. But already in the screening stage, you have to take the regional and site-specific context into account, because the site, the integration with existing industries is extremely important for the performance. Really, without taking that into account, you can't say anything quantitatively. So we did that already at the screening stage, took that into account, and the sites that we look at were specifically sites in the Småland area that already today handles large amounts of biomass, specifically pulp mills, sawmills, and combined heat and power plants that use biomass as a fuel. And then based on this screening, we ended up in selecting a technology that is called gasification in combination with Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. So it's very complex. But essentially, a very simple description, gasification is a high temperature process. It completely disintegrates your biomass into really small molecules, and then you build up the fuel molecules afterwards. So that's what it does. And it's also important to say that this technology is very established for fossil feedstocks. There is no large-scale production of this type from biomass, but the chain after the gasification process in itself is identical independent of the type of feedstock you use. And that's very established. You have used this technology to produce jet fuels from coal for a long time. So the new part here is the first step, the gasification process, where you disintegrate the biomass into these small molecules, the gas, essentially. And I should also say that what is really, really important here, I talked about integration with existing industrial sites. And this is really, really important because it can make the technology a lot more both resource efficient and cost efficient. Resource efficient by increasing the yield of your product, by using the byproducts that already exist at these sites, and by reusing the heat produced in the process. And economically also by reusing a lot of existing equipment that we don't have to rebuild and pay for one more time, because it can have a dual purpose and be reused for other purposes as well. So that's really, really important for the overall performance. So then based on this selected technology, we then selected 2 specific sites, one pulp mill and one heat and power plant, and did a really detailed or quite detailed study of what in these technologies need to be adapted to these sites. Where can it be located? We already did location studies and looked at specific costs related to that, and then evaluated the performance of the technology, both cost-wise and resource efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions and so on. And that ended up in then the results that showed that the production process is technically feasible, it's sustainable, and it's cost competitive to other types of comparable processes, which Mischa will talk more about later.
Very interesting. And you have at the Växjö site, you have both combined heating and electricity plants. So you have the gasification there, and you would add on some steps to actually make
Yeah,
this.
exactly. I mean, today they burn or combust the biomass. And you can sort of reuse part of that equipment to add the gasification instead, and then you add this other, the reassembly process that I talked about.
And there is no competition. They won't get mad if more of the raw material goes to sustainable aviation.
That's the nice thing about integration. We make sure that the district heating demand that they have today is supplied anyway, partly from still combusting part of the biomass, but partly from residual heat from our new process.
And we will meet Eric from Växjö Energi later on today, so he can attest to that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think we'll move on to Mischa Walk. And Mischa, goedemiddag, I can say to you. You've been involved, SkyNRG, your company, you've been involved with bio-sustainable aviation fuel since day one. I mean, you have a long experience from this. And in order for you to show your slides, we're going to let you take over the screen. Mischa, over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jacob. We have been here since day one, and it's been very exciting to see how the industry has matured. And I think in the preparation of this seminar, you asked me to take the FFS project and place what we are doing here in a broader global context. And I'm very happy to do that because it has been quite interesting to see how the industry has developed. And the industry today is quite different from what it was 5 years ago. And to maybe illustrate that, let's say 5 or 6 years ago, you would make headlines if you would operate a single flight on 10% SAF. That would be a big thing. Today, SAF is being used on a daily basis in Stockholm, but even more so in Los Angeles and San Francisco. So really, we have moved away from this being a very nascent market to a place where SAF is commonplace, really. And what has enabled that is policy. We all know that sustainable fuels are more expensive than conventional jet fuels, and policy is key to enable the growth of this industry. Since 2016, we see that driven by this policy, there is commercial scale production. So the first plant was in Los Angeles, still relatively small, but a big step to move away from batch scale production to commercial scale production on a daily basis. As Barbara also mentioned, we need to diversify away from just the used cooking oils that are being used today as a feedstock, and we need to diversify the feedstock and technology portfolio. It's therefore encouraging to see that we now have 6 different technology pathways, so different feedstock technology combinations that can supply fuel to commercial aviation. And then finally, the overall supply chain, the way that we supply fuel from the industry gate to the wings of the aircraft have become much more efficient. And if we add all these 5 factors up, I think we see that SAF has become much more competitive than it was 5 years ago. So we are definitely not the only ones in Sweden trying to make this work, but there are many initiatives like our FFS project around the world. And the policy part is one specifically interesting part that is worthwhile to take a little bit longer to discuss. I think what has happened in Sweden is great news. The reduction quota that has been approved is going to drive the development of these fuels into the future. So that is a big step. Norway has a similar scheme in place. But if we look a little bit further across Europe, we see that there are multiple member states that are looking at reduction quota or mandates. And these include some of the big jet fuel using countries. They include Germany, France, Spain, the Netherlands. And if we add all those numbers up, we see that we need just over 2 million tons of SAF in 2030. Aside from these discussions on the member state level, there are also discussions going on in Brussels at an EU level under the Refuel EU Aviation debate that is currently going on. And it is also likely that that will result in an EU-wide mandate. And if we just assume for a moment that that will be a 7.5% use requirement, that means about 3 million tons of SAF. So from a demand point of view, the SAF is really going to take off, to use the obvious aviation analogy, and we're going to be looking at 2 to 3 million tons in 2030. If we then look at the supply side, I think that that's where the challenge is. For a long time, as Eric said, or Jacob said, we've been in this from day one, and initially the challenge was always creating the demand, being innovative to get a bit of demand going. Right now, we see that that focus is shifting, and the challenge will be supply. Right now, we have World Energy, the first production facility, and Neste, who are able to produce SAF, a total of 110,000 tons maximum. So that's clearly not a lot. But if we look at the plants that are being developed, that's already much more encouraging to see. You see all the logos on the slide. These are all projects that are in one of the development states. So if we take a bit of an optimistic view and assume that all of them will happen, which will likely not be the case, but even if we do, then towards 2025, we'll be looking at roughly 1 million tons of SAF. And that is globally. So that will not all go to Europe, because the Americas, the US, Canada are also moving forward with SAF. So that illustrates that there will be a shortage in the initial years of SAF supply. There will be a bit of an imbalance. Obviously, when the demand is there, the market will react, but likely with a lag. And the other thing that is good to mention is that we talked about the technology diversification. Right now, the production is based on vegetable oils and animal fats, including waste oils. And we see some of the initiatives on this slide. So Red Rock will be using forestry residues, Fulcrum will be using household waste, and LanzaTech will also be using forestry residues as a feedstock. So very encouraging to see that we see the initial proof points for these new technologies. Clearly, these are not the large 500,000 tons SAF facilities, but the first commercial scale units are very important. I'd like to take 1 minute to talk about what we're doing in the Netherlands at SkyNRG. We've started as a supplier of SAF, but since 2016, we are also a producer of SAF. That has been a big step for us, and something we are very proud of to have come this far. Early last year, we announced a project, so project DSL1. DSL stands for Direct Supply Line. And we announced it only last year because at that point we had the offtakes in place and we had the round A financing in place. We're not doing this alone. We're doing this with all of the partners that you can see on the screen. I'm very proud to collaborate with all of them. They've been instrumental in making this work. KLM being the main offtaker of the jet fuel, and then we have SHV and Shell as the offtaker of the byproducts, the LPG and the naphtha. So really, this was a big effort of all of the partners to make it work. And what we are eventually working towards is a dedicated sustainable aviation fuel production facility. And dedicated is special because many of these biorefineries focus on road transport. We found a way to make a business case work for aviation specifically. Looking to produce 100,000 tons SAF using waste oils as a feedstock. Mainly going to be using contaminated waste oils. So the used cooking oil that everyone will be using is basically too clean to go into our facility. And then another innovative part is the green hydrogen. So 40 megawatts of green hydrogen produced from wind power. We are currently in the engineering phase and on track to start up the plant in 2023. So that's all great, but obviously we're here to talk about Sweden. So what we are looking to do is to take the learnings from DSL1, and obviously the fact that it's DSL01 implies that there are many more DSLs to come. And we want to build one of these next DSLs in Sweden. And the FFS project is a great first step. So where are we today? With concluding this FFS project, I think we took quite an essential step. We have a committed consortium with, as has been said, important players from across the supply chain, feedstock, project development, off-takers, academia, really a solid base that will enable the further development. We have selected a supply chain setup we have defined a site, and we have selected a technology. We have done the initial techno-economics and have a first iteration on the business case, which is sufficiently positive to justify further development of this case. And very important, as was mentioned before as well, we have, I think, a very sound sustainability approach that is also future-proof. Then the key question is, how do we make this work? How do we get to a point in time where we have steel in the ground? Mentioned before, but it all starts with policy certainty. We need long-term policy certainty to enable to build an investable business case. So the reduction quota that has been approved is a fantastic step in that direction. And that will be the thing that enables us to have the commercial discussions. So one of the things, if we move this project into a next phase, is to get the commercial discussions going on the offtake, but also on the feedstock supply, on the site, on the technology licenses. And those contracts need to underpin the business case that we have developed. SAF is still an emerging market, so you need to prove that there's a market for your product if you want to do project finance. So really, the offtake is going to be key, and we're fortunate to have KLM on board as a partner that's interested in that offtake already. Because if we have that offtake in place, that is going to be key to enable the financing of this plant. In parallel, we need to progress the engineering. So you do the engineering in what they call a front-end engineering design or a FEED to validate some of the technology choices that we have made. And also to get a much more detailed cost estimate. So we have the initial economics and an initial business case, and we'll be iterating them along if we get further into the process. And then finally, all of this should result in a financeable business case. But the financing will not be easy. This is a first of its kind facility or a flagship facility or whatever we want to call it. But there is no facility we can point towards where this is already happening, this supply chain, this technology.
And now I will use the mandate of the moderator and see if we can, because you will be back later on, and I'm starting to hear that maybe we'll have an announcement by I don't know. We don't know because it's not in our hands to see if this project goes on. But you end on financing. That seems to be the only thing left that we really need to solve. With that, we are moving on. I thank you very much. Sending questions to the project. There is a short area for that under the screen that you are looking at now. Sending projects, and we will come back to you with responses in the near future. All slides will be available for you on the project page. We'll send out a link to that later on. And these were actually the only slides that you will see here today. So from now on, we will have panels. And now I would like to move over to a short film from Swedavia showing how they can play a role in actually transforming the aviation industry.
Klimatfrågan är vår tids största utmaning och då måste alla göra allt. Man måste minska sina utsläpp halvera utsläppen var 10:e år för att vi ska nå Parisöverenskommelsens mål om högst 1,5 grads temperaturökning. Och för flyget innebär det att vi måste använda hållbara biobränslen och på sikt även elflyg. Den kommer bidra till en ökad inblandning av biobränslen i flygbränsle och på så sätt minska flygets klimatpåverkan. Vi behöver ytterligare incitament och styrmedel för att vi ska få till en storskalig produktion av inhemskt biobränsle från skogsrestprodukter till exempel. Och troligtvis kan det behöva någon slags förlustgarantier för företag som är modiga nog att ta det här steget. Ja, vi har börjat med att städa framför egen dörr. Vi har ett mål om 0 utsläpp av fossil koldioxid till 2020 och det kommer vi nå. Det innebär att all vår egen verksamhet kommer att vara fossilfri. Sen så jobbar vi också med att se till att biobränslemängderna ökar i flyget på olika sätt. Och vi försöker också säkerställa att våra flygplatser är förberedda för att ta emot elflygplan när de kommer. Vi har ju själva flugit på biobränsle sedan 2016, men nu har vi tänkt att vi ska försöka öka efterfrågan på biobränsle. Och då har vi gått ut och bjudit in andra aktörer att vara med i våran upphandling, och så de också ska kunna flyga på biobränsle. Det är för att skapa en större efterfrågan och få igång en fungerande marknad för bioflygbränsle i Sverige.
Och nu är vi tillbaka på vårt seminarium där vi fokuserar på kan vi? Sorry, I was speaking Swedish. I was distracted by Lena in the film that happened to be in Swedish, so I just started speaking my own language. I'm sorry for that. We are back in the seminar and we're going to talk about the market. We've heard about the technology, we've heard about the project, we've heard about the international global demand. But I have two persons with me here in the studio. And we will have Marlene Blomgren Svensson from Växjö Airport on the screen in a short while, a regional airport in Sweden. I'll start with you, Gijs van Popta from KLM. You've heard Barbara on the stage. She's really committed. KLM is really committed. How come you're doing this in spite of a crisis? You're still pushing for sustainable aviation fuel. And by the way, sustainable aviation fuel is short, is SAF. So when people talk about SAF, it's sustainable aviation fuel.
Yeah, thanks Jakob, thanks for being here. Thanks for starting in Swedish. I can practice a bit my Swedish. Sorry, I'm based in Stockholm, but I haven't picked up on that yet. So I work for KLM. You asked us why do we do all this? You probably remember, but we are actually the oldest airline in the world still operating, 100 years. And 100 years of aviation has led us through many difficult times. As many of the audience know, it is a difficult time today. You don't grow 100 years old by looking in the rearview mirror and just celebrating yourself. You grow 100 years old by looking ahead of yourself and seeing what is coming. And I think as KLM, we're proud to be pioneers. We've pioneered so many things in aviation history, whether that be the first flights to North America commercially, whether that be first joint ventures in the industry, partnering up with others to make things happen for our customers. Moving forward, also, we need to partner on sustainability. So we have been doing this. It's in our blood. We have been doing this for over a decade with regards to biofuel. So it's been very important ride for us.
Yeah, and I mean, you had one project in Holland, and now you also have you've been part of a project in Sweden. How come Sweden?
Yeah.
How come Växjö?
Yeah, very good. So Växjö is one of the regional airports, so to say, that we serve. We started that flight in 2018. It's typical to our business. We are where our customers are, and we have a lot of regional presence here in North Europe. So for instance, in North Europe, we have 15 routes that we usually operate. That's not only to the big cities like Stockholm or like Oslo or Copenhagen. No, it's also into the region where our customers are. And by doing that, we can connect them efficiently in Amsterdam, and that's our business. Why Växjö? Växjö is a regional of Småland where we know there's a lot of our customers, whether they are corporate or local, but it's also a destination. A lot of people want to visit Växjö. It's an iconic region in Sweden for being green, and we thought it would be very appropriate then to also fly as green as we can. So it's actually a route that is operated with 5% biofuel structurally. Just to put it in perspective, that is the same mandate that is required now by the Swedish government in 2025. We've been operating that since 2018, like that.
Fantastic. Marlene Blomgren Svensson, you are environment manager at the airport of Växjö. You also represent, in a way, the regional airports of Sweden, because and what role is in sustainability playing for regional airports? I mean, why do you get involved in this?
Yes, of course, this project and the whole question is playing a major interest and have a major impact of the regional airports. The regional airport in Sweden is today owned by municipalities and regionals and, of course, of local parties. But it's very important that you can fly on sustainable aviation fuel from these airports in the future. It's sort of a overliving question, I think. The goal for us as airports is that we shall have a domestic flights which is fossil-free in 2030 and a fossil-free domestic and international flight from Swedish airports in 2045. And the efforts necessary to achieve these goals are mainly at industrial and political level. And we at the airport are already prepared, and no major investments are required to be able to handle the sustainable aviation fuel today here.
No, basically, you can take in any tanker coming in, or any truck coming in with sustainable aviation fuel into your system and mix it up to a standardized, accepted level. It's not really complicated in that sense.
Yes, we can do that today. And we do it also at the regional airports. But it would, of course, be fantastic if we can do it with local produced sustainable aviation fuel in the future.
And you talked about political pressure. I mean, Växjö in 1996 set up a climate neutrality goal. I mean, they must be the first municipality in the world to do that. And I know a lot of people were shaking their heads in 1996. So you must have a very strong political support also for this, not only the industry, as we will hear later.
No, yes, that's correctly. And the politicians here in Växjö see the airport as very important for the region. And today, many municipalities, regions, and companies has travelers policies that says that you are not allowed to travel by flying. You are allowed to traveling by train or some other transportation sort of. But in the future, it would be very good if we can say that you can fly sustainable from Småland Airport or other regional airports whenever you want to, because we have this production site so local.
Okay, stay on the screen, Marlene. Joachim Versén, you are what's called category manager fuels at Swedavia, and you run some of the larger airports in Sweden. No competition with Marlene on the regional airports. On the contrary, you complement each other. But you've been really also active in sustainable aviation fuel. Tell me, what have you been doing?
Yes, we at Swedavia we want to be a role model for developing airports to be climate smart airports. And one of the projects I've been involved in is to procure sustainable aviation fuel for our employees airport traveling every year. And we've started with this in 2016, and we have done it every year since then. Last year in 2019, when we procured the contract for 2020, we invited other companies, organizations and authorities in Sweden to joint procurement, where we did the procurement, with Swedavia did the procurement, and the actors who joined the procurement was entitled to call off on that agreement.
So how many were interested to take part?
We have discussions with a lot of companies, but there was 3 companies who joined us on the contract for this year, and it was SOS Alarm, Systembolaget, and Secretariat.
And that's us.
That's you. We are very glad, and we made a coordinated order in the start of 2020, and we got the delivery last week, 22nd of September. Initially, we wanted to have the delivery in April, but due to the corona situation, we had to postpone it.
And you've received prizes for your procurement because it's not easy to actually direct procurement or people think it's not easy to direct procurement to support sustainable development. But you did it anyway, and you are now involving other companies, you're inviting other companies. Can they join you for next year?
Yes, we started the procurement of the contract for next year, early this year. But we had to pause it because of the situation in the world. But we are these weeks starting up the project to procure a contract for next year, and we'll start to talk with the companies and authorities and other organizations to join us for the contract next year. And we have to see if we can land the contract somewhere in the spring next year. And we are discussing with a big number of companies today, so there is a big interest on the market.
Yeah, the difficult thing is to get started, and then eventually it will become easier. You are doing, Heis, you're doing roughly the same thing. You have a project where people can actually buy in, and in order to be neutral competition-wise, there are other airlines in the world than KLM, but you were part of this project, so you committed yourself here.
Absolutely. No, but you're touching on an interesting point, and it's interesting to have indeed the Swedavia story as well, because at the end what I think we are all realizing is we can only get there together. Yeah. So as KLM also, we've said we open up to anybody who wants to participate. So we have launched a corporate biofuel program. But just to put things in perspective, right? Today, 2020, we fly with 57 times more biofuel than we did in our first flight in 2011. Now that sounds fantastic, but it's
from a very
such a small little bit of our total consumption. We need to keep on pushing that needle. Yeah. The only way to do that is by asking customers also to contribute. We've done several studies here in North Europe to ask our customers, what do you think about flying? More than 50% of people realize that flying leaves an impact on our planet. More than 35% of these customers feel not so good about that. What we then see is that more than 50% again of these customers want to pay a little bit extra to offset or to compensate in a way. But in fact, what we see is that only just more than 10% are actually doing that in the past year. So we need to keep on making that easier, more available, so to say. And that's why it's so good to gather as much as possible stakeholders in a program to push that. So we've done it in our corporate biofuel program. Södra, who's here today as well, one of the first outside of the Netherlands to participate also in that program, which is a program to offset the price difference of sustainable aviation fuel versus the normal fossil fuel.
Because sustainable aviation fuel is more expensive than fossil fuels. Yeah. We want to get rid of the fossil fuels. The alternative is still more expensive. We pay a lot extra for the flights that we are not having now, but we'll keep them for next year, I think. Marlene, sustainability is important for the regional airports. And what else will you be doing? Now we have sustainable aviation fuel. What other initiatives do you have at the airport long-term on developing?
We at the airport are now nowadays joining another project called Grön Flygplats, Green Airports, and where we are working with all the other stuff or things with at the airports, how we drive our vehicles at the ground, how we use the energy, and this is also a big question about the fuel the fuel that we are tanking in our planes.
It's very good. So a couple of final words. What more can the market do? You are reaching out to customers and the customers of customers. You're doing stuff at the airport that moves on. You are taking part in projects, and I think very important what you're doing. You are doing off-take agreements. You buy the fuel that will be produced in the future. Some short words. What else can be done? What do you have that secret that you don't want to tell anybody, Joachim?
No, but I want to mention that one of the main goals we had when we started this procurement of the sustainable aviation fuel was to contribute to a volume to the market to make it possible for actors to start up big-scale productions in Sweden. So. That's very important, I guess, and this project is very welcoming to us.
Marlene, when will you be fossil-free at the airport?
We almost is that right now, and most of the airports are very good working on that. So I think we will be there in a few years.
Maybe even sooner if you're almost there, and then you have the aviation fuel you need to work on. And KLM, you have tremendous environmental targets. At the same time, aviation is discussed and criticized from an environmental point of view. So you need to meet the critical voices and show that you can actually do more. And I'm not afraid to praise whoever is a pioneer, and I think you've been a pioneer. So congratulations.
Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, and what is important, I think, to realize is we serve customers that have a business to run, and for that they need to travel to places in the world where, unfortunately, today you can't go by train or by ship. But then what is our responsibility is to make sure that that can be done in a sustainable way. And that's why we wake up in the morning. It makes us feel good to really push that needle.
And actually, you stopped before COVID. You stopped one plane of the day every day between Schiphol and Brussels, and instead you have a train
you're very
running.
right. So multimodality is a big thing in Europe. So where can we replace frequencies close to our hub with trains? But in fact, we launched our own model of a new aircraft, the Flying V. Look it up on the internet. It's a fantastic new model. We are developing that together with Airbus. Next step, we need to make it fly on sustainable aviation fuel. But we need to keep pushing everywhere to make it sustainable in the future.
Thank you very much, all three of you. And now we are soon going to be back with a panel really looking at the core of the issue. What do we need to invest? And now we will have a short film from Södra that will show some of the forestry practices in place today. So over to a film, and then we move on to investment.
Hi, we would like to take a moment to tell you about Södra's impact on the climate. For the very first time, our climate effect has been thoroughly examined, and we are now ready to present the results. Let's start with the forest. Growing trees absorb and store large amounts of carbon dioxide, creating a positive effect on the climate. Our members' forests stored a total of 2.1 million tons of carbon dioxide during 2018. For the climate, that's really good news, of course, but as you'll see, the forest can do many times better when we add the substitution effect. And what's that, you may ask? Well, to put it simply, the substitution effect is created when forest products are used instead of products that have more negative climate impact. Steel, cement, plastics, and fossil energy are a few examples. When they are replaced, the effect on the climate is positive. In 2018, the products we created from the forest had a substitution effect of 7.7 million tons of carbon dioxide. And that's as a positive climate effect. To that figure, we now add our carbon reservoir in the forest. But we also need to take away the negative emissions created in the value chain when reaching all the way to our customers. The total climate effect of Södra then becomes 9.2 million tons of carbon dioxide. So what does that mean? Well, as a comparison, it's as much as 1/5 of Sweden's reported fossil emissions, but as a positive climate effect. From our first climate report, 2 things map out the road ahead. The emissions we need to lower in cooperation with our suppliers have been identified. And most importantly, it's been proven that forest products are a vital part of the climate solution. So instead of regarding the forest as merely a carbon reservoir, we can create a more sustainable future by letting the forest work for the climate.
Welcome back to this seminar about producing sustainable aviation fuel in Sweden. We've heard from the project that this can be done. We've heard that the sustainability issues are secure. They need to be worked on all the time, but we have taken that into account. There is enough raw material, and the airports, the market, the airlines are interested to get going. But now let's move on to the real issue. What is needed to get an investment going? Because this is not for free. It costs money to build new technology, and sustainable technologies are often new and need technical development. But I have here with me a large panel, and we have start in the back, Erik Tellgren from Växjö Energi. You are with us on the screen.
Yes.
We have your colleague from Växjö, Henrik Brodin from Södra, standing next to you. We have Lisa Razaka you're the head of the European Investment Bank office in Stockholm. We have Jens Holm you are head of the Transport Committee of the Swedish Parliament from the political side. And we have from the Swedish Energy Agency, Deputy Director Remi Kollesar.
Yes.
But I will start with the industrial perspective. Erik and Henrik, you are the industrialists in this project. You're the ones actually having to invest to make this possible. How do you feel about hearing all the positive voices, and then you know that deep inside you need to balance the books and get going? Start with you, Henrik, and then Eric.
Yeah, there is a great potential and great possibilities with this, but we have to be aware that the risk is still very, very high. It's new technologies, it's an uncertain market, and most of the uncertainty is something we can handle. We handle all day. But the problem is that we still see political risk, and that is very hard for us to handle. And especially when we see the Swedish quota system, which is not supporting advanced. This is a
what is advanced?
Forest-based. So actually, the Swedish quota system supports import from like Asia or someone else, cheap fatty acids from other parts of the world, and they don't support domestic, and actually not even what EU want us to support. EU want us to support the forest industry and to make residues from the forest and to have advanced quotas, and we don't have it in Sweden. So we see a great political risk, and we don't see that we actually want that type of feedstock in the political decisions. So this is what we need.
Yeah, it looks like demand will be big in the next coming years. Behind us we have a picture of your forest in your region, Södra. So you have more than 50,000 forest owners as members of Södra. Erik Tellgren, what's your perspective? I mean, we heard there is no competition between heating and sustainable aviation fuel. Do you agree with that?
Yes, that's correct. So in this area, speaking out of the regional and local base here, and looking at the pictures of the well-managed forest that we all love and that is outside our door. We have for decades and even a century lived in parallel in a symbiotic context with the industry nearby, the wood product industry, the forest management industry. So we know the business model for that, and we know how to do, and we know how to support each other in the way forward. So I only see that as strengthening the path towards a sustainable future, not a true competition.
And I think it's very interesting to hear you say that, because I know this is not your first rodeo. You have been involved with environmental or sustainable fuels in Sweden before through the Lantmännen project. Henrik, you've been involved in many other projects in Sweden and in Norway. It's tough in the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. It's very, very tough in the beginning, and you have to convince the market, you have to convince like everyone that this actually is something that is better than what they used to use. So it's really tough, and if you look on this type and we compare this to actually what Eric had done in Lantmännen and what all the investments we have seen, the investment we have done in Sunpine with the tall oil diesel, we have in this case so great portion of the cost that it is capital cost. So this is on another level in investment than everything else that had been done in Sweden.
Yeah.
And this makes it even more difficult.
And Eric, what do you say? Investment cost, new technology, what do you bring with you from your experience? What is the most important to think about here?
Yes, well, in the big picture, we of course know what our generation is required to do, and that is accompanied by high-level political targets, sustainability targets to reach, and a lot of creativity in local and regional areas from different sectors and industries. But the glue in between is that the high-level targets must be reflected by long-term policy making that we can rely on, and meeting some disappointments with the fuel ethanol initiatives, and that we have that is overcome now but also later or rather recently with the support, policy-making support for renewable electricity in Sweden with the electricity certificate system, where we started a large investment here, 150 million euros, based on the certificate system. That was at our own risk, of course, but starting with a level of some 300 kronor, so 30 euros per megawatt hour produced. And the system today, after only 3-4 years of operating the new block, is it has played out its role. Actually, it's at 1/10 of that level, and that is of course a disappointment when making a cost estimate and cost estimation based on 25 years lifetime.
Let's move to politics. Jens Holm, you are head of the very influential Transport Committee of the Swedish Parliament. And you didn't say that, I said it, but I know that you are. You are not one of the parties behind the budget that was presented just 2 weeks ago, but I know that you've been in line with many of the proposals on the environmental side. You've been pushing the environmental side for many years. What do you think? Is there political support for what this project has shown can be done?
Yes, I think there is a strong political support for this and similar kind of projects. For a start, we need to handle the very fast rising emissions from the aviation sector. Before Corona, aviation sector was the fastest growing sector for greenhouse emissions in Sweden and in Europe as a whole. In Sweden, we do not have any binding targets to reduce these emissions. And we can do it different ways. We can fly less, we can try to electrify the aviation sector, or we can put different fuels into the tanks. I think we should do all of this because there is no single bullet in this. And if we want to scale up this, and I would like to scale up this, we need more investment money. That could come from us, from the state, could come from European Investment Bank as well. We could have mandatory quota targets to blend in biofuels in the normal fuel for the airplanes. So there are different sets of political action we can use here, but I think we need to move much quicker than we have done up to now. But I think we must remember that biomass is a limited source. The forest is a limited source. This is a fantastic forest we see behind here. Looks like a lot of biodiversity, etc. And that is the way we would like to keep our forest. And then we can't extend all the biomass. So we need to be very clever and not to use too much. And that is a very, very special challenge, I think.
Lisa, Jens already mentioned you and said, well, and you're in a very special position today because we have the Green Deal in the European community. We have lots of money being investment over the next few years. What do you think that the bank, you don't need to promise anything to Henrik right now, but what is the European Investment Bank's view on projects like this? Advanced biofuels, sustainable aviation fuels. Is it something that you are looking at, or
there is no doubt that sustainable aviation fuel is the near future solutions for reducing the carbon footprint in the aviation industry. And of course, this is something that the European Investment Bank is looking into. We have at the moment 5 to 6 projects in our pipelines. Nothing has been signed yet. And I think some of the risks that we have been discussing here today, some of the issues that we are also tackling. Technical risk is one, but that's not the main. It's the market price risk, which is the issue for us. And when we look at other type of projects like biodiesel, bioethanol, biogas, which is not in the aviation sector, but have similar risks, we have seen that these fits very well in this project finance structure where you have an offtake agreement. And here we could see a strong aviation company taking an offtake agreement that we also discussed earlier today with a residual forest producer. And if you have an agreement like that for 10 years, whereby the aviation company accepts to buy the fuel at a minimum price, in a way we have then taken away the market price risk, and there's the benefit for everybody. And also from a bank's perspective, we could then go in and finance such a joint venture and not take a risk of a corporate. So there's a lots of things to be do in the future, and we really welcome these types of initiatives and projects.
It sounds like many of what you're bringing up have already been taken care of, in the sense that there is a cooperation with airlines. We have 50 billion in Swedish green credits being decided or discussed now in Parliament. So it would seem like many, if you have a 10-year offtake agreement with airlines, then you're home, it sounds like.
Well, that's one example of a solution.
Yeah, exactly. Remy, the Energy Agency has financed this project.
Yes.
You've financed a few other projects in Sweden, which I think is fantastic, because we heard before there is one other project in the world, Lanzatech, that is making sustainable aviation fuel from forest residues. So this is number two, would be number two if it gets going.
Yes.
How can you support the continuation now that the project report will land on your table?
There's several things. The first thing is, just I want to say, is we've been active in supporting research, development, and also beyond in pilot and demonstration within the area of biofuels for many years. And given that, we've been building a knowledge capacity, we've been building knowledge in terms of possibilities to scale up and use biofuel for many applications, including aviation. So we are very happy to see this development, and we really believe in the potential of using advanced biofuels for specific for aviation, even though there are many other applications. And so we are looking forward to continue this kind of investment in terms of research development and pilot demonstration. We have the government has announced specific money for continuing this kind of activities, and specifically in terms of aviation. For the coming bill, so we really welcome that.
Yeah, they in fact gave you some money to look at how can you use domestic technologies, substrates, in order to move a technology from ready to commercial.
Yes, because there's one thing is technology development is one thing, and the other is alignment with policies and other kind of incentives you can create for the market, and that's things you have to align. And we are at the Swedish Energy Agency, we have all those kind of tools in terms of looking at policies and looking at incentives we can create, and at the same time also the supporting technology development and innovation. So that one thing we are looking forward to, and the other thing is this specific support for research and development in terms of and demonstration in terms of biofuels for aviation and fossil-free decarbonization of aviation, which includes even alternative solutions like electrification. So we really see that it's very positive that it's the sector that is put ahead, and that in that way we can continue to support this transition.
Henrik and Eric, what more do you need? You have the aviation reduction quota, you have investment money in the budget from the government, you have the interest from the European community and the investment bank for types of projects like this.
Let me return that immediately. I think that it's true, as was identified, that the Växjö regional and local government since long has identified sustainable development as a success factor. And in fact, the tagline for this project is the same as that for the local and regional government. Yes, we can. And that has been shown since in 2 decades we have slashed CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions by 2/3 and been able to combine that with the sustainable development and growth of the society. So that is a remarkable thing, really. So we have done the home lesson. We are ready to do the work. We need the stable policy making. We have some lessons learned that we don't want to repeat. So we need good and stable policy making for good and stable market conditions, providing a risk mitigation in this project. Then we are prepared to lean forward and do the work and to deliver results.
This sounds very good. Let's move on to Jens. I mean, this must be honey for years. I don't know how you say that in English, but this must be wonderful to hear. You have the industry, you even have international interest, you have the authorities on your side, of course. You as politicians tell them what to do, maybe not you personally, but everybody's there. Sustainability needs to be controlled very carefully, but everything else is there.
Yes, and this is a very good start, and we should have done this 20 years ago, but now we are here, and that's fantastic. And it was mentioned before the advanced biofuels, and I totally agree. It is not on at all that we import so much substrate from the other side of the globe in order to make biofuels here in Sweden. So we need more stringent criteria, environmental criteria for the biofuel that we produce. And also, as I mentioned before, we need to be very careful so we do not use natural forest, pristine forest to produce biofuels. So we need to identify what should we have the forest for. And we need a lot of wild forest out there just for the sake of being forest. So if we can come to grips with this kind of different angles of the debate, I think we have a fantastic future. And I can see that there are many different sectors that would like to cooperate on this.
So that is one of the lessons that you kind of give to Södra. I mean, can you prove that you will be able to keep the biodiversity, the old forest, keep the production forest as they are, and then use them or some of that material for aviation fuel?
I would say yes. If we look at Södra, we have 52,000 owners. So we have 52,000 small forest owners owning a forest like this. And this is like their backyard. Of course, for them, it's important to earn money in the forest, but they live close to the forest. They live next to the forest. They want to have birds in the forest. They want to have biodiversity. So for us, all of these go hand in hand. We will never have a sustainable forest if we only look on taking out as much trees as possible. Our members want to have forests that are alive in many ways. And for us, we have 7 sawmills, 3 pulp mills, and there is no doubt that sawn timber is paid best for the forest owner. So we want to take as much as possible into the sawmills. We want to take as much as possible of what's not possible to get in the sawmills into the pulp mills. And then what we can't use for products, it is what we can do for energy. And then I think aviation fuel is the best alternative to actually substitute by these forest residues.
Lisa and Remy, I mean, you are different positions, but you are part of the entities that will make this possible. Is the timing good? Should they wait half a year for the Green Deal to get going, or should they get going now before, as the Green Deal is taking off? When is a good time to really start calling you up and sitting down to discuss continuation and proposals? Is it now, yesterday, or tomorrow?
That's a good question, but I think it's there's never a perfect moment. I mean, you have to see the opportunities coming. And one thing is, once again, is for biofuels, you have many applications, and this particular for aviation is a very interesting one. And that's very important to look at that. In terms of technology, basically it's more or less the same to produce biofuels, it's just the application. And what is important now with this context is to create the value chain and create also the collaboration with all the actors, which means the one producing the biomass and producing the biofuels and using the biofuels. So creating the whole sector together, and in that case, that's one way to make it happen when you have both production, demand, and uses.
Lisa, final word.
No, we are open for discussions whether a project is bankable or not in this moment. We are very open to start a dialogue and explain what we do and what we look at, so it's easier for a new project to be bankable, so we can finance them.
Very good. Stay behind and sit down with Henrik and the others after this meeting. I will now thank you. We will come back in a short while for a summary. A summary with some of the key players to actually make this possible in the coming years or whenever it can be banked or financed. So stay with us. We're going to look at a movie explaining the SkyNRG project in Holland, because they got the consortia together, they got the financing together, they are on the way to producing a plant that will start production in 2022. It's not forest residues, but it's on its way, and I think that is very important.
Considering the continued growth of the aviation industry and related carbon emissions, the sector needs to become more sustainable. A lot is being done in the Netherlands already to reduce fossil jet fuel use, including flying lighter, more efficient routing, and cleaner planes. But the biggest impact? Replacing fossil fuels with sustainable aviation fuel. As this new fuel is not yet available on a large scale, we are building a sustainable aviation fuel plant in the Netherlands, the first of its kind in Europe. The plant will be ready in 2022, running solely on regional organic waste streams such as used cooking oil and residue streams from other industries. With the use of green hydrogen, the plant will produce the most sustainable aviation fuel in the world. On top of that, bio-LPG and naphtha are produced. Supply to the airport will be done through existing infrastructure, allowing planes to fly on sustainable fuel. Compared to conventional kerosene, sustainable aviation fuel reduces CO2 by over 85% and has a positive impact on local air quality. With this new plant, we're contributing to a sustainable future for aviation and a circular economy.
So we are now coming to the close of this really exciting seminar. It's a success story, it's a hopeful project, hope for the future, and let's hope that the different pieces can come together. Henrik Brodin from Södra is here with me. We're going to be joined by Mischa is there, and Erik Tellgren is on the screen. These are three of the principal partners, I think, of a possible future development. We don't know what they're going to say. Maybe they are already going, but let's hear what they say. Henrik, Mischa, Erik, we hear that sustainability is very important to keep track of. We hear that a takeoff agreement is also very important. We hear that it needs to be bankable, it needs to be, you need to have the customers online, but 95% of all the voices I heard here were just saying, go for it. And I mean, Henrik, I'll ask you first and then move over to the screen. But so when are you going to go for it?
I'm going to go back to what I addressed earlier. What's most important, of course, it's to get an off-take agreement. And to get the off-take agreement, we have to have wealthy partners in all of this area. And the problem is biofuel is more expensive than jet fuel. And mature technology of biofuel is more cheaper than the advanced that we have. So we have to have a market that actually pays more for these advanced.
You need support as the technologies, the first plants are being set up.
Yes, because the one who builds the first plant, they will build the most expensive plant and the plant that runs probably not that, the worst plant, because you learn all the time. And to go to the first is really hard. So we have to have some risk sharing, some sharing of capex, things like that. But then we also have to have, we can go to this market. We can take it either by a quota, or we can start to find companies that actually want to fly with this in the future together on this journey. If we can have partners that actually want to pay more for flying the first class, not only first class of getting champagne on it, but first class of getting actually the greenest way of flying. So when you really fly, you fly responsible.
Okay, Eric and then Misha. Eric, you've done this before. You've heard lots of positive voices. You've mentioned what needs to be put in place. You have a very strong group of committed partners. Anything else you need that you haven't heard today?
I agree with the Henrik addresses the lessons learned from earlier on. So there are some things to be considered and removed and replaced by support of this infrastructural development. If I may add another strategic perspective aside of the climate and environmental perspective here, it's also on a national level and outside the densely populated areas and also the coastal areas. Växjö is a non-coastal location. We were early out. We knew what brought Sweden from being the poorest country in Europe in the early 19th century, and that was public education combined with a strong and quick infrastructural development. And that is still required, especially I think in when starting out from a non-coastal location. So for regional development, for local development, considering the situational context, it is very important to accelerate this infrastructural development that we are now discussing. So that's
I move over to
other perspective important as well.
I move over to you, Misha. You got this project in Holland going a couple of years ago. It's now underway. What do you see in this project that is different? Are there advantages? Is there something you didn't have? Are they missing something? And when do you think the project will be signed, launched?
Well, I think we've already started, and I think it's not when will we launch it. I think it's more about continuing and intensifying the partnership. I mean, in the end, what is really needed, and it has been said multiple times, is true cooperation. And that always sounds easy, but let's face it, cooperating is difficult. And that's also what we will find if we move forward in this project. Because it requires you to be open, to be transparent, and to also make concessions. And I am convinced that this can be done. I mean, it has been shown that this is possible in other parts of the world with other projects. Sure, they're always slightly different in their setup, but there are also many similarities. So in the end, we jointly need to also take a bit of a leap of faith, because you're never going to have 100% certainty that everything will be possible. But as soon as you start the project and say, we are going to do this, sure, things will need to fall into place. The thing Henrik mentioned, that the advanced biofuels are more expensive than the HEFA-based biofuels. So we need help. We need help from government. We need help from the European Investment Bank. We need help from the Energy Agency. But as soon as we start and say, this is where we want to go, and we need you to help us with that, I think the more committed you are, the stronger of a voice you have in asking for the specific things that you need to get the project off the ground.
Thank you very much, Misha, for that. We are a few minutes past the deadline, so that's why I'm pushing a little bit. And I just want to conclude with a couple of words. Security, Misha talked about. Well, we have security in that we need to get rid of fossil fuels. That's the only thing we know for sure, because we need to act on that. And that can only be done through technological development, through using less resources, and finding new solutions. And I think what we've heard today is a beautiful example of a strong value chain from the raw material to the offtake agreements to the customer and the customer's customer. I think we need to build on that chain, and together we can make this happen. Yes, we can. The information from this seminar will be available on the project site. If you need more information, contact RISE or the project participants. And with this, I just want to thank you for participating, and it's been a pleasure to have you out there in the world. Thank you very much.